Now, the Home Office has been criticised over a pilot scheme to electronically tag asylum seekers arriving in the UK on dinghies or at the back of lorries. The Prime Minister defended the scheme, saying it was important to ensure that migrants couldn't just disappear off the Home Office's radar.
Yes, however, Labour's Shadow Immigration Minister Stephen Kinnock said the plan was, quote, yet another desperate attempt to distract public attention away from the fact that under this Home Secretary, asylum decisions have plummeted, backlog has grown, and they are completely failing to tackle the criminal gangs.
Well, is this another distraction or an attempt to control our borders? What do you think? Joining us now is the immigration lawyer, Ivon Sampson. Thank you so much, Ivon, for joining us. So first of all, what's your view on the whole idea of tagging certain asylum seekers or certain people who've come here via dinghies and lorries?
Well, my view doesn't really count. What I can tell you is about the law, what the law says they can and can't do. And the government is entitled under Section 10, or rather Schedule 10 of the Nationality and Immigration Act 2016, to tag offenders. Originally, it was actually meant to implement the desire of the government to their 2015 manifesto to tag those who are either being deported or facing deportation proceedings. And that was extended this January in electronic tagging. So essentially what the refugees will have is electronic tag attached to their ankles, and the Home Office will be able to track them. What they have to do, the Home have to consider whether there's a risk of absconding. And what they've, in deciding to tag a person, the Schedule 10 also allows for exceptions. So those with mental health problems, pregnant women, and those under 18 can be exempted under the provisions.
It seems pretty reasonable to me.
I'm conflicted about this, actually, because I have absolutely no problem at all with people who are convicted criminals getting tagged. But I am obviously aware that there are people who enter the country through irregular means, so via the channel or on the back of a lorry, but then who end up having their asylum claims accepted and therefore can be said to be genuine asylum seekers. I'm not very comfortable with having people who might very well be genuine asylum seekers tagged, but I understand for people who have had their asylum claims rejected. Is there that nuance? Can that nuance be appreciated by the law?
Well, the distinction the Home Office give is those entering the countries illegally, or those being deported or facing deportation proceedings. The Refugee Convention doesn't require an asylum seeker to enter the country legally, first of all. That's a provision the government has put in the new bill that came into force, the new act that came into force this year. And that makes it illegal, but the Refugee Convention doesn't make it illegal. So that's going to be looked at, no doubt, by the courts. That's how they're able to do it under Section 10. Then there's an issue about the individual rights. You see, asylum law, humanitarian law, and the Convention on Human Rights is about individual rights. And whenever you have a collective policy and you're not looking at each individual's case, then there's always a problem. And the Home Office have refused to publish data about exactly how many asylum seekers are absconding. I can tell you about my experience. Oops, I'm so sorry. I can tell you about my experience in the past 20 years that I've not had a single client who's claimed asylum who's absconded. It's not in their interest. Their interest is to make sure they comply with the rules, cooperate with the Home Office, attend all the interviews they have to do, and have an asylum decision. The problem, in my view, is the length of time it takes for the Home Office to make a decision. So what normally should take 6 months on their own, under the Home Office's own policy guidance, takes years. And that's the problem. So I think the money should be spent trying to sort out the problems between ministers and the civil servants. There's a tension between those two, in my experience. And therefore, I think the money should be spent trying to get the system working better.
Well, it's good to get your view. I'm just wondering, though, with regard to if, as you said, that nobody that you've ever represented has actually ever absconded, then surely it won't matter if they have a tag or not. They'll be thinking, well, it's fair enough, we're not going to go anywhere anyway, but as a precaution. But then, as you said, again, it's just those who are more likely to abscond, which wouldn't have been any of your clients anyway.
I can just reiterate what I said before. People have human rights. And for you, it might not be a big deal having an electronic tag attached to your ankle. But for a lot of people, it's an abuse. It's a breach of their physical and moral integrity. One of the general exceptions to Schedule 10 is if a person's Article 8 rights are infringed. But I'd be surprised if the courts would decide in favour of any applicants or any appeals. I'd be surprised because the government does have a right to control immigration borders and to protect the public. So it's a difficult one, and I'm afraid it's likely that these asylum seekers will be tagged and the government will proceed with it.
Well, thank you for bringing us up to speed with all of that. Ivon Sampson there, an immigration lawyer. There are some statistics that came out a couple of days ago. It says here, this was reported in The Sun, at least 10,000 failed or missing asylum seekers still living in Britain 10 years on. So just an indication of the numbers, obviously, because it's hard to get accurate figures, isn't it, really?
Well, and also, I mean, there was that guy who had that... who put that bomb in that taxi near that hospital.
Yeah,
he was a failed asylum seeker. I mean, look, I'm all for it. I have no problem with that. If I was an asylum seeker and I'd come via dinghy, which I wouldn't do, let me just tell you that now, but if I had, I don't like water. I can't swim, unlike your daughter, and I don't fancy my arm at the channel. But, you know, frankly, I think that's fair enough. If you're going to come through those means, you have to accept some sort of potential that we need to make sure. If you're prepared to go over the channel or go in whatever it is, then you may well abscond. So I think it's fair enough.
Yeah, I do. But also, for me, it always comes down to if you're coming from a safe country, if you're coming from France.
Exactly,
I'd understand if they were coming direct, if we happen to share a border with a war-torn country and they were coming from there. But, I mean, it's France, isn't it? And that's where what it always comes down to for me